What makes a song work? A piece of music is really just a set of sounds, pitches, noises, and timbres arranged together into this thing, a sort of magical cultural object that has an impact upon us emotionally. How do musicians do that?
How does he do that? Oh.
So, this is the first in a series of podcast episodes or video essays, depending upon where you find this, talking about how great songs, some of them famous, some less so, work. This episode, I'll be starting with a pretty simple and very famous song, Bob Dylan's The Times They Are A-Changin. So, released in 1964, The Times They Are A-Changin is written in the key of G at a tempo of around 169 BPM in 3/4 timing. The chords are G, D, C, A minor, which Bob plays on an acoustic guitar with harmonica breaks and 5 verses. Each verse ends in a reprise, which is in fact the same as the title of the song. Whoa, slow down. So, this is not going to be one of those breakdowns. That might be a bit of an exaggeration of how some people analyze songs, but it's not too far off. Of course, the tempo, the time signature, instrumentation, key changes, and all those details matter. They matter a great deal. Talking about any art is incredibly difficult. I get that. In fact, that's part of the reason we have art in the first place. It's to say and do things that we struggle to with just normal language. So I understand the tendency to stick just to these details without really digging deeper. But as listeners, those details aren't necessarily the most important parts of a song. We don't even start by noticing these sorts of individual elements much of the time. So let's start our analysis elsewhere with the most immediately obvious important thing: what a song does. Effect. What art does. As far as I'm concerned, the ultimate point of any piece of art is to have an effect upon the observer. To have some sort of emotional, aesthetic, or maybe intellectual impact upon people. To me, The Times They Are A-Changin evokes some sense of profundity. A very vague sense of profundity maybe, but profundity nonetheless. It feels serious, it feels heavy, almost prophetic somehow. It's almost like the voice of some Old Testament prophet preaching to us about societal or cultural change while lugging around a beat-up acoustic guitar and a harmonica. A weird image in a way, but the song certainly is evocative of something like that. Think about its use at the beginning of the Watchmen film. I think it's brilliant. Think about why it works so well. It's not necessarily saying something specific. It's a portentous song that immediately says to you, this is important. This is historically significant. This is profound in some way. The film is using the song to say, pay attention. This is what the song is doing, for me at least. This is the effect of the song on the listener. Now, the effect of a song might not always be the one intended by the composer or songwriter. Think of any song that you dislike or you find cringe. Presumably it wasn't intended to work that way, but that isn't the point. The point is that what the song is doing, its effect, is where we should start when talking about how music works. Basically, let's always keep in mind what a song is doing, and we can talk about the specific details as the how. How art works. Time for a tenuous analogy. Think about any food you love. Paella, pizza, satay, the humble sandwich. These dishes and the world cuisines that they come from, Spanish, Italian, Indonesian, I guess sandwiches are British. What we first notice when we eat them, or even just see them, is actually the sort of dishes they are and where they come from. Crucially, this is also how people who cook them think about when making them. Put it like this: taking a song apart and just looking at the elements individually, the music theory stuff, it's like analyzing a pizza solely in terms of X grams of carbohydrates or the specific acidity and sugar levels, the percentage of salinity and the distribution of lipids and proteins on top. I'm boring myself just saying that. It's letting the tail wag the dog. It takes the fun out of it. That's because to talk only about these details is to remove food from its culturally understood context. To use yet another analogy, it would be like talking about Lord of the Rings just looking at its language and grammar without acknowledging that it's a Western, in this case specifically Northern European, fantasy novel. The fact that it is a Western fantasy novel is central to how it works. If it wasn't a Western fantasy novel, it would be totally different as a work of art. Wait, this is obvious, isn't it? It is obvious, but people do this with music all the time. There's a certain deterministic approach that we've all heard. So someone might say, this song is great because it changes key in this way, or because it's in a weird time signature, or it uses polyrhythm at these points, or maybe even because it was the first to use a certain instrument or technique. I've even heard, this guitar solo is great because it uses this specific interval, with little to no further explanation of impact. Doing this, just listing these objective characteristics of the music, without discussing the bigger picture, is to miss the point entirely. Again, it removes music from culture, which is most of its impact. The details, the music theory bits, definitely a part of it. They're how the music does it. We will get there. But first, let's remember that all music fits within a little thing, actually quite a big thing, we call genre or style. The first step then in working out how a song does what it does is looking at genre. So we're not going to talk about its key or dive straight into the details of how it's put together. We'll get there soon. But genre is what situates a piece of music culturally. When I was a teenager, I was in a band with my friends. We tried to write some songs together, but we never really got very far. Like all the great bands, our creative differences tore us apart. Count us among the Beatles, Pink Floyd, Black Lace. I remember one day when we were writing some original music, and I asked my friend, so, what genre style are we going for with this song? He looked at me blankly and asked, genre? Style? Does it matter? Can't we just write a song without labeling it a certain genre and see where it takes us? At the time, I didn't quite know how to reply, but the answer is, it's no. Emphatically no. Like, we cannot do that. No one ever has or ever will be able to. Genre is one of the central elements of music, whether listening or composing, and it's key to how a song works. You can't talk about a Shakespearean play ignoring the fact that it is a play. You can't talk about a paella ignoring the fact that it is in fact a paella. It's a Spanish savoury rice dish, as much as Hamlet is an Elizabethan English play. So genre is music, and music is genre. Understanding genre is all about understanding the idiom that you're working in or that you're listening to. It's the craft that's being employed. Whether that's blues or jazz, folk, rock, metal, or EDM, it doesn't really matter. That isn't to say you can't mix and match genres or that you can't push against generic conventions and cliche, but you can't escape genre, and nor should you ever want to. So, back to our Bob Dylan song. The fact that Bob Dylan is a folk singer and that the Times They Are A-Changin is a folk song really is more important to our discussion of the song's effect right now than the specific tempo of the song or the specific key or chords used or the specific notes he plays during the harmonica breaks. The fact that this is a folk song is immediately evident to anyone listening. So noticing the genre is as immediate and unconscious as noticing that it's an acoustic guitar being played or that Bob has a male voice. Our brains are so primed for this sort of interpretation that we do it without even knowing that we do it. So you play someone the first 2 or 3 seconds of the song before the vocals come in and ask them what they can tell you about the song. They'll probably be a bit nonplussed. They might even be a little bit indignant at the unfairness of the question. How on earth could they tell you anything given how little they've heard? And if they're not a musician, they're likely going to be even less confident in telling you anything about it. Well, in actual fact, I think they could make a very good guess about its genre and probably even be able to guess relatively accurately when it was written and released. Our brain has done all of this interpretive legwork before we can even consciously think about it, because we are cultural creatures and we've heard something like this before to compare it to. So, what am I getting at here? Basically this. The fact that this is a folk song is immediately obvious, and this primes us to expect a particular experience. To take it further, this is the experience of the song. The details of music theory are part and parcel of this, but getting caught up in the particularities without first understanding the broader picture isn't helpful. Put it like this, to go back to food, you expect certain things from a pizza. You also expect certain things from a folk song, even if, in either case, those expectations are subverted. Chocolate pizza, anyone? They are key to the experience. Folk music can be many things. It can be fun, serious, it can be fantastical or everyday. Most importantly though, this type of folk song is part of a working class tradition of songwriting that we automatically understand as, if not archaic, then old sounding. It has a direct link with European history that, depending upon one's taste, lends the music either a sense of authenticity or rootsiness, or just old-fashioned fustiness. Now, as a folk lover, I obviously think the former rather than the latter, but the point is that this genre categorization is central to how we listen to music, And Bob Dylan understood this as much as anyone when writing this song. It was consciously written in the style of Scottish and Irish folk ballads in an attempt to adopt the cultural signifiers of that music. So, let's review where we are so far. All art, including music, is ultimately about effect, or if we prefer, impact, meaning. There's no point in talking about it without structuring our conversation around that in some way. Secondly, genre or style is the first element that we really notice. We actually consciously notice the abstract stuff first, not the details. And songwriters and composers usually start with this, alongside the effect that they're trying to elicit, rather than all of the individual details. So this is where we get into the juicy music theory stuff. After all, genres are what they are because of it. Blues is blues because of the way it uses seventh chords and blue notes. Jazz is jazz because of how it pushes Western harmony to its limits within a mostly improvisational framework. Reggae is reggae because of its unique rhythm and lyrical subject matter. These are the details that make genre, and a song can't be very effective if it gets the details all wrong. Let's take a closer look then. Harmony. The Times They Are A-Changin is very harmonically straightforward. In typical folksy fashion, the chords are all very easy. There's nothing there beyond what you'd learn in your first year of learning guitar. So we're talking G major, we've got a C chord, A minor, and D. That's it really. The very epitome of cowboy chords. Harmonic simplicity is the name of the game in most European folk music. Key changes are kept to a minimum really. Chord qualities rarely even go to sevenths, never mind beyond. So this song starts on a G chord and moves to an E minor chord. Here, there's actually very little difference between these two chords. There's only one note changed. The next chord, C, again only changes one note from the E minor. This is hardly even a progression in a way, given how little actual progression there is. The next few lines bring in an A minor and a D briefly, and they sort of meander gently around themselves rather than really going anywhere. It isn't until we hit the fifth line of each stanza when Bob lingers on that D, which is the fifth or dominant chord, that we really feel something specific happen harmonically. The dominant chord of any key wants to go back to the root chord, which is here the G. This sitting on the dominant chord builds the tension and it propels us back to its resolution on the G when he sings the refrain.
The times they are a-changin'.
This happens every verse and is this simple harmonic trajectory which gives the stanzas their structure. The song doesn't really require anything more sophisticated than this. Kind of in the same way that haiku can work very straightforwardly within that form and not really need to do anything fancier. Rhythm. The Times They Are A-Changin is as simple rhythmically as it is harmonically. It's simply a fast folk waltz. This means that it's in 3/4. Basically, each bar is a count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Nothing crazy, and a common enough time signature in folk music and plenty of classical. It's less common in pop and rock though. Possibly the most notable things about this song's rhythm is simply its insistence and its occasional sloppiness. This is a man hacking away at his guitar with more of a mind on emotional effectiveness than pure accuracy. The energy is almost akin to that of a homeless man with a placard around his neck that reads, "The end is nigh." It just so happens that Bob is brilliant, and he brings a convincing profundity to that vibe. Production. The production on this song is remarkably simple by modern standards. It's a guy, a guitar, and a harmonica. Recorded in one sitting, no overdubs. Again, this is one man hacking at a guitar and singing about how we live in a society.
We live in a society.
Too much in the way of production would probably be inappropriate. Listen closely to the song though. There's a sort of audible patina to it. Now, patina is the layer that forms on metal, stone, or other surfaces such as a coin, a roof, or a statue. It's a sort of tarnish or oxidization that visibly ages the appearance of materials. On this recording, what I'm calling the patina is the not quite perfect fidelity of the recording. It's a little bit muddy, a little distorted compared with, say, a contemporary Taylor Swift song. Anybody, no matter how little we think we know about music, is actually very capable of detecting this. It's similar to how you don't need to know much about buildings or architecture to spot an old building. It's something we just feel. Again, our brains are very, very good at doing unconscious interpretation, even if we struggle to point out how we get there, which is what I'm here for. This sort of patina is everywhere in older music, from any decade, and it will doubtless be something that future generations notice about contemporary music. After all, sound recording quality improves over time and production tastes change too. So this aural patina, or sound quality, ages the song. This is not a bad thing though. We often say, oh, This song has aged as a negative. But there is a difference between aged and aged poorly. We could just as well say that the patina enriches the song. All art is culturally situated, and we listen to it precisely because of what it is. We read Shakespeare in part because he wrote in Elizabethan England. We eat pizza precisely because it is an Italian dish. And the same is true of the song. We listen to it in part because we recognize it as a 60s folk song. Lyrics. So, musically, it's all simple stuff, huh? It might be tempting to say that the music is kept simple to draw attention to the lyrics. I think this is true to a degree. Dylan was clearly more lyrically oriented as a songwriter than he was musically. But if it was just about the words, then Dylan would have kept to the written or spoken word rather than folk music. Rather, it's better to say that the simplicity of the music works with the lyrics instead of just not getting in the way. So, what hasn't actually been said about Dylan's lyrics? I'm under no illusion that I have anything revolutionary to say here, so I'm not going to do a super deep lyrical analysis. What the lyrics do for the song, though, beyond the actual imagery, the internal rhyme, the sibilance, the two things most worth me mentioning are trajectory and use of cliche. Trajectory. So, the rhythm is constant, it's almost hypnotic. The harmony is simple, and although it raises and resolves the tension within each verse, it's the same set of chords all the way through. There's no chorus, no bridge, no real outro or intro. Structurally, there is no real beginning to end trajectory. The lyrics, though, that's where the drama happens. There's the trajectory within each verse that follows the chord progression. The imagery and the commentary kind of piles on line by line. The first 4 verses stick to a general theme each. We've got rising waters, writing and talking, politics and politicking, generational change. This builds upon itself until the refrain at the end of each verse. The times they are a-changin. The last verse is the only one not directed at some part of society. It's the culmination of the song and it sums it all up for us. There's actually little dynamic change over the course of the song, and the chords, as I've said already, are all the same, with the same basic melody. So this lyrical trajectory is what gives the song its arc. Cliche. Come gather round people wherever you roam. This is the first line, and, well, isn't it just pure cliche? Of course, you could argue that it's only so cliche because Dylan made it so, but it's actually just a version of an old folk trope, one that we all recognise on some level. A singer or a speaker in a public place talking directly to the public and asking something of them.
Ho yay! Ho!
It's the exhortation of the town crier, hear ye, hear ye. It's the revolutionary in the public square calling people to action.
Let us all unite! Let us fight for a new world, a decent world that will give men a chance to work.
It's the preacher at the pulpit talking to his congregation.
Jonah did the Almighty's bidding. And what was that, shipmates? To preach the truth in the face of falsehood.
Bob is demanding you pay attention to his song, quite literally. Cliche, just to be clear, isn't a pejorative. It's just how art and genres work. They're symbols and they're signals. There is, of course, such a thing as a bad use of cliche, but the use of cliche isn't inherently bad. Think of B.B. King playing a blues solo, or even the way that the Talking Heads approach song form. As uncliche as they seem in many ways, they can't escape it entirely. So if we go through the lyrics one by one, they're basically just a list of vague cliches, or cliched sounding folksy aphorisms. Accept it that soon you'll be drenched to the bone. You better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone. Keep your eyes wide, the wheel's still in spin. The point here being that cliches work, okay? They work. For one, they contribute to the folksiness of the song. They signal folk wisdom as well as tradition. It also helps that in speaking in folksy aphorisms, he's not saying anything specific whilst also saying a lot. It could fit in any time, any place, while obviously still summing up the social attitudes of the 60s. See again its use in Watchmen. It just works. Conclusion. Now, I'm not going to pretend that this is the definitive statement on the times they are a-changin. There are a million more things to be said. I didn't even touch upon melody or vocal style, for example.
There's a choice we're making. We're saving our own lives. It's true, we make a better day, just you and me.
I'm sure as well that some people listening will have a very different interpretation of certain elements or a different view in some way. Hopefully, though, I've helped a few people understand how this great song works and how music affects us beyond a simple, yet simultaneously over-intellectualized music theory-driven approach. To repeat myself one more time, as it is worth remembering, music is more than just the music theory stuff, without being separate from it. In the same way that pizza isn't just a carbohydrate base with a slightly sweet acidic sauce on the surface and a topping of coagulated milk proteins and lipids. How unappetizing does that sound? Pizza is a product of Italian culture that has gone on to be adopted by cultures across the globe to their tastes, while still staying essentially the same. Please, for the love of God though, avoid looking up the monstrosity that is Brazilian pizza. In a similar way, a song, any song, needs to be talked about more broadly than its individual parts, but in terms of what it does. The Times They Are A-Changin has been covered by hundreds of artists in a range of different styles, from Herbie Hancock's far-out jazz version.
Come gather round, people, wherever you roam, and admit that the waters around you have grown, and accept it.
Through to Blackmore Night turning it into a full-blown Elizabethan Monty Python-esque thing.
Come gather round, people, wherever you roam.
Though the core anthem of change element remains throughout, only Bob's original version truly evokes those feelings I mentioned earlier, that of the Old Testament prophet or the end is nigh homeless preacher. Damn, what a song. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe and share with anyone else you think might enjoy it. If you're keen, give me some suggestions of what you'd like me to tackle next. I'm happy to do pretty much any song, as long as I actually like it myself, of course. I'll even try to talk a little bit less about food next time. I've actually managed to make myself hungry. You'll find me on loads of social media. I'm on Reddit, Instagram, Twitter, all under the name Big Yellow Praxis. So if you want to read my inane ramblings or see endless Brian Wilson memes, go follow me there too. Cheers!